Alright, so reading from Appendix 14 in the Unknown Reality, Volume 2 by Jane Roberts, a Seth book. This is a really short appendix, and I'm only reading a small part that Jane picked up while she was in bed or getting ready for bed. So this is just a tiny bit of information about Atlantis. So, quoting Jane, she says, "As I was getting ready for bed after our last Seth session, I suddenly wondered about Atlantis. Then from Seth, mentally, I thought I got the information that Atlantis, as it's come down to us in myth and story, was actually a composite of 3 civilizations. Atlantis is a myth in response to a truth then, I suppose. Next I got that Plato picked up the Atlantis material himself psychically. He didn't get it the way he said he did. I never asked Seth about Atlantis. I'm afraid the cultish ideas connected with it turned me off long ago." End quote by Jane, and that is all I'm going to read for Appendix 14. But, in speaking of Atlantis, and since this is so short, I figured it'd be great to read the information from Seth Speaks, The Eternal Validity of the Soul, by Jane Roberts, a Seth book, of course, on Lumania. Okay, so this is from chapter 15. And before I officially read this, just take note that Rob mentions that, you know how Seth brought up the 3 civilizations. Only 2 have been mentioned. As far as I know, anyone out there that knows any different, definitely comment on that. Okay, so the chapter is called Reincarnational Civilizations, Probabilities, and More on the Multidimensional God. Okay, so Seth states, "In a manner of speaking, it can be said that you have reincarnational civilizations as well as reincarnating individuals. Each entity who is born in flesh works toward the development of those abilities that can be best nurtured and fulfilled within the physical environment. He has a responsibility to and for the civilization in which he has each existence, for he helps form it through his own thoughts, emotions, and actions. He learns from failure as well as success. You think of physical history as beginning with the caveman and continuing up to the present. But there have been other great scientific civilizations, some spoken of in legend, some completely unknown, all in your terms now vanished. It seems to you that you have perhaps but one chance as a species to solve your problems, or be destroyed by your own aggression, by your own lack of understanding and spirituality. As you are given many lives in which to develop and fulfill your abilities, so has the species in those terms been allotted more than the single line of historical development with which you are presently acquainted. The reincarnational structure is but one facet in the whole picture of probabilities. In it, you have literally as much time as you need to develop those potentials that you must develop before leaving the reincarnational existences. Groups of people in various cycles of reincarnational activity have met crisis after crisis, have come to your point of physical development and either gone beyond it or destroyed their particular civilization. In this case, they were given another chance, having the unconscious knowledge not only of their failure, but the reasons behind it. They then began with a psychological head start as they formed new primitive groupings. Others, solving the problems, left your physical planet for other points in the physical universe, When they reached that level of development, however, they were spiritually and psychically mature and were able to utilize energies of which you now have no practical knowledge. Earth to them now is a legendary home. They formed new races and species that could no longer physically accommodate themselves to your atmospheric conditions. However, they also continued on the reincarnational level as long as they inhabited physical reality. Some of these have mutated and have long left the reincarnational cycle, however. Those who have left it have evolved into the mental entities that they always were. They have discarded material form. This group of entities still takes a great interest in Earth. They lend it support and energy. In a way, they could be thought of now as Earth gods. On your planet, they were involved in 3 particular civilizations long before the time of Atlantis, when, in fact, your planet itself was in a somewhat different position. So right here, Rob asks Seth, he says, "Do you mean orbit?" And Seth says, "For now, leave the word quote-unquote position, particularly in relationship to 3 of the other planets that you know." And adds, "The poles were reversed as they were, incidentally, for 3 long periods of your planet's history. These civilizations were highly technological, the second one being, in fact, far superior to your own along those lines. Sound was utilized far more effectively, not only for healing and in wars, but also to power vehicles of locomotion and to bring about the movement of physical matter. Sound was a conveyor of weight and mass. The strength of the second civilization lay mainly in the areas now known as Africa and Australia, although at that time not only was the climate entirely different, but the land areas. There was a different attraction of landmass having to do with the altered position of the poles. Relatively speaking, however, the civilization was concentrated in area. It did not attempt to expand. It was highly ingrown and dwelled upon the planet simultaneously with a large, unorganized, dispersed, primitive culture. Not only did it make no attempt to quote-unquote civilize the rest of the world, but it did everything in its power to impede any such progress, which was considerable for a long period of time. The members of this civilization were largely a fringe group from the earlier successful civilization, most of whom had decided to continue existence in other areas of your physical universe. These, however, were particularly enamored of earthly life, and also thought that they could improve upon the last experiment in which they had been involved, though they were free to move on to other layers of existence. They were not interested in beginning from scratch again as an infant civilization, but in other areas. Therefore, much of their knowledge was instinctive with them, and this particular group then went through what you would call the various technological stages very rapidly. They were particularly concerned in the beginning with developing a human being who would have built-in safeguards against violence. With them, the desire for peace was almost what you would call an instinct. There were changes in the physical mechanism. When the mind signaled strong aggression, the body would not react. Now, psychologically, you can see vestiges of this in certain individuals who will faint or even attack their own physical system before allowing themselves to do what they think of as violence to another. This civilization, therefore, left the natives that surrounded them in peace. They did send out members of their own group, however, to live with the natives and intermarry, hoping peacefully to thus alter the physiology of the species. The energy often in your time given over to violence went instead into other pursuits, but began to turn against them. They were not learning to deal with violence or aggression. They were attempting to short-circuit it physically, and this, they found, had complications. Now, energy must be allowed to flow freely through the physical system, controlled and directed mentally, or psychically if you prefer. The physical alteration was a strain on the entire system. The creative function and basis that has been distorted into the idea of aggression, the urge to act, was not understood. In a manner of speaking, breathing itself is a violence. The built-in inhibition resulted in a tied-up system of mutual controls in which the necessary thrusting out of action became literally impossible. An overly conscientious, restrictive mental and physical state evolved, in which the organism's natural physical need for survival was in every way hampered. Mentally, the civilization progressed. Its technology was extremely activated and propelled onward as it strove to develop, for example, artificial foods, so that it would not need to kill for survival in any way. At the same time, it tried to leave the environment intact. It missed your stage of automobiles completely and steam-driven vehicles, and concentrated rather early on sound. The sound could not be heard by physical ears. The civilization was called Lumania, and the name itself went down in legend and was used again at a later time. The Lumanians were a very thin, weakly people, physically speaking, but psychically either brilliant or completely ungifted. In some, the built-in controls caused so many blockages of energy in all directions that even their naturally high telepathic abilities suffered. They formed energy fields around their own civilization. They were therefore isolated from contact with other groups. They did not allow technology to destroy them, however. More and more of them realized that the experiment was not a success. Some, after physical death, left to join those from the previous successful civilization who had migrated to other planetary systems within the physical structure. Large groups, however, simply left their cities, destroyed the force field that had enclosed them, and joined the many groups of relatively uncivilized peoples, mating with them and bearing children. These Lumanians died quickly, for they could not bear violence nor react to it violently. They felt, however, that their mutant children might have a resulting disinclination toward violence, but without the prohibiting nerve control reactions with which they were endowed. Physically, the civilization simply died out. Some few of the mutant children formed a small, later group who traveled the area as itinerants in the following century, with large bands of animals. They cared for each other mutually, and many of the old legends concerning half-man and half-beast have come down through the ages simply from the memory of these old associations. These people, as remnants really of the first great civilization, always carried within themselves strong subconscious memories of their origin. I am speaking of the Lumanians now. This accounted for their quick rise, technologically speaking, but because their purpose was so single-minded, the avoidance of violence, rather say than the constructive, peaceful development of creative potential, their experience was highly one-sided. They were driven by such a fear of violence that they dared not allow the physical system freedom even to express it. The vitality of the civilization was therefore weak, not because violence did not exist, but because freedom of energy and expression was automatically blocked along specific lines, and from outside physically. They well understood the evils of violence in earthly terms, but they would have denied the individual's right to learn this his own way, and thus prevented the individual from using his own methods creatively to turn the violence into constructive areas. Free will in this respect was discarded. As a child is physically protected from some diseases for a while after he emerges from the mother's womb, so for a period is the child cushioned against some psychic disasters for a period after birth, and carries within him, still for his comfort, memories of past existences and places. So, the Lumanians for some generations were supported by deep subconscious memories of the civilization that had gone before. Finally, however, these began to weaken. They had protected themselves against violence, but not against fear. They were therefore subject to all of the ordinary human fears, which were then exaggerated, since physically they could not respond even to nature with violence. If attacked, they had to flee. The fight or flight principle did not apply. They had but one recourse. Their god symbol was a male one, a strong, physically powerful male figure who would therefore protect them since they could not protect themselves. He evolved through the ages as their beliefs did, and into him they projected those qualities that they could not themselves express. He was much later to appear as the old Jehovah, the god of wrath, who protected the chosen people. The fear of natural forces was therefore initially extremely strong in them for the reasons given, and brought about a feeling of separation between man and those natural forces that nurtured him. They could not trust the earth, since they were not allowed to protect themselves against violent forces within it. Their vast technology and their great civilization was largely underground. They were, in those terms, the original cavemen, and they came out from their cities through caves also. Caves were not just places of protection in which unskilled natives squatted. They were often doorways to and from the cities of the Lumanians. Long after the cities were deserted, the following natives, uncivilized, found these caves and the openings. In the period that you now think of as the Stone Age, the men you think of as your ancestors, the cavemen, often found shelter not in rough, naturally formed caves, but in mechanically created channels that reached behind them, and in the deserted cities in which once the Lumanians dwelled. Some of the tools fashioned by the cavemen were distorted versions of those they had found. Okay, so that is technically the end of that session 562 from Seth Speaks, you guys. I just want to say that there's more. Session 563 goes into ant people, I see here. and so much more information just on this little Lumanian topic, and I want you guys to buy this book. So I'm not going to give it all to you. I know you can get it elsewhere, but I'm not going to give it all to you. So I've learned some new information about Laurel Davies, and I'm going to tell you guys, usually I would be like, oh, buy the Seth books, go on Amazon, find yourself a used copy, you know, it's $5 to $10 cheaper. You know, get your hands on whatever you can. And of course, if that's what all that you can afford, but an extra $5 to $10, guys, you can get a brand new copy. Brand spanking new. I mean, it's gonna smell good. Like, really good. Oh, those new books, man. Anyways, so if you haven't bought this book already, I'm gonna just suggest right now that you guys go to Amazon and buy yourself a new Seth Speaks book, or even a new brand spanking new Unknown Reality Volume 1, Volume 2, and all of the others, and help support Laurel Davies, because that is the woman that Robert Butts chose to marry 2 years approximately after Jane died. And she was a huge support. And if I ever died, I would want my husband to remarry. He needs to be taken care of, right? And I'm sure that Laurel Davies took great care of Rob. I know that she did. And so that is why I'm telling you guys this. So anyways, thank you for listening. Sorry I'm not giving you the whole thing, but it's so interesting, and it's so much better to have the book in your hands. I'm telling you, it's a completely different experience. You can pause, you can look at it, you can go into a little reverie in your mind. You know, it's just better. It's just so much better. So anyways, I'll stop blabbering. Thank you for listening. I love you all. Hope you all have a freaking awesome day.